Hi, everybody. Welcome to Christian Homestead. My name is Jared. If you haven't already, please make sure to subscribe. I've just come across the most fascinating of timelines, and I do believe it's a timeline that has to do with the Second Coming. And when you look at all the events on this timeline and what might be left, I think that we're at the very end. So we're going to start with this church news article. Elder Bednar dedicates Cleveland, Ohio temple, bringing the house of the Lord back home, quote unquote, to Northeast Ohio. The church's 221st operating house of the Lord will serve members in 4 states in northeastern Ohio, including the Kirtland area. Of course. And of all places, this new temple is in a city called Independence. This is Independence, Ohio, which that may or may not be coincidence. There's Elder Bednar and his wife. And let's take a look at the map really quick. So Kirtland, Ohio is to the northeast of this new temple. And when you draw a line between the two using this measuring tool on Google Earth, they are about 34 kilometers away, or in miles, that's going to be about 21 miles. So it's relatively close. I don't know if Kirtland is technically part of the Cleveland metro area. It seems like it kind of is. I can't really tell, but it seems like it is part of the metro area. Uh, one of these news outlets pointed out that right now we have the oldest temple in the church and the newest temple of the church right next to each other, which is really interesting. And of course, we think back to 2024 when the Kirtland Temple was purchased from Community of Christ, which more on that in just a minute. The first thing that I saw in regards to this story, I think this was yesterday. This is KSL News Utah, and this video is called "A Temple Built Once Again." This is Carl Anderson. He is essentially a historian who has specialized in the Kirtland era of church history. And he had something interesting to say here. All right. The narrator says Carl served as president of the Cleveland Stake back in the 70s, and he was a student of the gospel, intrigued by scriptures and prophecies echoed by Joseph and Hiram Smith concerning the land of Kirtland. Now, this is Carl Anderson. And he said, I, the Lord, will build up Kirtland, and your children may possess the Kirtland lands, but not until many years shall pass away. And then I will stretch forth my hand and build up Kirtland, and I will and it will be polished and refined according to my word. So, okay, and then it goes to the narrator. So, with no timeline given, Carl led the charge to help fulfill that prophecy, doing missionary work through restoration, restoring the Newell K. Whitney store, once headquarters for the church, the Joseph and Emma Smith home, the Johnson Inn, and the Johnson Farm in Hiram, where Joseph was tarred and feathered. And eventually, decades later, renewed ownership of the first temple built by the church. And then later on, it says, so this is Carl Anderson again. He, meaning the Lord, he loves this land. He took his early saints there. He prophesied that it would be rebuilt after many years would pass away and the children would come back. I love that. On this channel, a lot of the time we talk about Missouri because I just moved to Missouri last year. Before that, I lived in Kansas for 5 years. And ultimately, I'm from Utah. And I didn't find out until I moved here and went to the 8 Witnesses Monument in Liberty that my 4th great-grandfather, the great-grandfather of my great-grandfather, Jackman, lived in Jackson County. And he was on the first high council of the first Missouri stake presidency under David Whitmer. And so I find a lot of fulfillment in me and my family returning essentially to Jackson County and to Missouri. And I don't know if you feel inspired, maybe you could think about Missouri or Kirtland, Ohio, or Ohio in general, or maybe Nauvoo. But things are happening, and I'm trying to do the best that I can to report on that. But just wait, we're getting to that timeline, but we got to lead up to it. Okay, so we have this second video called "Prophecies Fulfilled at Cleveland, Ohio Temple Dedication." I'm going to read from my spreadsheet. I took the transcript and threw it on my spreadsheet. My spreadsheet called quotes A through Z. What's currently row 371. Okay, so this is Elder Bednar being interviewed by Mike Hedrick, who is a KSL reporter. All right, Mike said, "The land of Kirtland will be built up. This was one of the promises given. Does this feel like somewhat of a fulfillment of that prophecy?" And Elder Bednar said, "I wouldn't say it's fulfilled in total. It's certainly a part of that promise that the church would be strengthened and grow and prosper in the area near Kirtland." So it's interesting. He acknowledges that there is a prophecy because some people would think, well, because like there's so many times, I'm not saying Elder Bednar or any of the apostles, but just members of the church in general, sometimes we'll think about church history and think, well, it's just history. Like it's nice to think about our history and our roots, but those are things of the past and these areas don't really matter anymore. And that's not true. He confirms that there is this prophecy. Now, as far as the prophecy goes, I think both of them, Carl Anderson and Elder Bednar and Mike Hedrick, are maybe referring to Doctrine and Covenants. If we go to section 117, this is a revelation for Newell K. Whitney and Oliver Granger, basically telling them, like, hurry up, you need to come to Missouri. We're leaving Kirtland. You need to come to Missouri. Verse 5, "Let the properties of Kirtland be turned out for debts, saith the Lord. Let them go, saith the Lord. And whatsoever remaineth, let it remain in your hands, saith the Lord." And then toward the end, or at the end, verse 16, "And again, verily I say unto you, let all my servants in the land of Kirtland remember the Lord their God, and mine house also, to keep and preserve it holy, and excuse me, to overthrow the money changers in mine own due time, saith the Lord. Even so, amen." This part about overthrowing the money changers, I looked in the Institute student manual. I don't know what that means exactly, other than how it sounds on the surface, which would be to like repossess the Kirtland Temple and the area of Kirtland. That the church is being driven from there for now, but at a future date, the saints would inherit it again. What's interesting, I do respect Community of Christ for, you know, um, purchasing the temple from whoever owned it before and taking good care of it. But it's interesting because they used to charge money for you to tour the Kirtland Temple. And now that it's back in the hands of the church, there's no longer paid tours. Um, I'm not saying that Community of Christ was necessarily the money changers, but just essentially the temple is back where it belongs. So you have this, and then you have section 124, um, which mostly has to do with Nauvoo. But there is a part that talks about Kirtland in verse 83. "If he will do my will, let him not take his family unto the eastern lands, even unto Kirtland. Nevertheless, I, the Lord, will build up Kirtland." So this seems to be the prophecy right here. "I, the Lord, will build up Kirtland, but I, the Lord, have a scourge prepared for the inhabitants thereof." Okay. Um, Need to cover a couple things before we move on to this timeline. There's some interesting things about Kirtland. Let's talk about the scourge first. So the next row down, this comes from Carl R. Anderson's book, Joseph Smith's Kirtland Eyewitness Accounts, page 245. The scourge that was placed upon the people in that prophecy is being lifted today. By the way, sorry, this is President Ezra Taft Benson, at that time president of the Quorum of the 12 Apostles. So he said the scourge the scourge that was placed upon the people in that prophecy is being lifted today, October 14th, 1979. Our prophecy said that yet your children may possess the Kirtland lands, but not until many years shall pass away. Those many years have, I feel, passed away. And now is the time. Now is the time to arise and shine and look forward to great progress in this part of the Lord's vineyard. And look what just happened over the weekend. We now have this temple. So now we have two temples there. That's another thing. I think people think that the Kirtland Temple is destined just to be a museum of sorts, just a historical site. And I don't think that's the case. I think that it's going to be used for meetings and maybe for other functions that we don't do today. Maybe there'll be new doctrines in the millennium. But we have the Kirtland Temple, and now we have uh, the type of temple that we construct now. I think there are different types of temples, but we have both types in this area. And this scourge was lifted October 14th, 1979. There's a story behind it. I think it might be Carl Anderson that brought this up, this fact up to President Benson. He's like, "Hey, there's this scourge on Kirtland. Do you know if that's ever going to be lifted?" And then he was like, "Yeah, we need it. Let's take care of that." And then he lifted the scourge. Just a couple more things. These are both from President Ezra Taft Benson. Um, this is also from Carl Anderson's book. I feel that I feel that I have been walking on sacred ground, he commented, and my soul is subdued and my feelings rather tender. As long as the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints endures, and that will be forever, Kirtland, Ohio will have great significance. And I don't think it's just the past either. I think that Kirtland and these other places that we're about to talk about all have important roles to play in the future. It's not just something from the past. I think they have important roles to play in the millennium. And it may have to do with Book of Mormon geography. It may have to do with the Jaredites, the Nephites. I don't know. I wouldn't be surprised. And then we have this from President Ezra Taft Benson. Another significant milestone in Kirtland was the organization of a stake there on October 16th, 1983. President Benson, who presided on that occasion, reiterated that the church in Kirtland would continue to grow and that the prophecies of rebuilding were coming to pass. Quote, "We have barely scratched the surface of missionary work in the Kirtland area," he said. I think essentially what we're talking about here is the building up of the waste places. These places that we had to abandon, these places that had and still do have a magnificent future. It's exciting because things are happening right now. And it just happened this last weekend. Okay. One last thing before we move on to this timeline that I'm excited about. I have a quote from Carl R. Anderson on my Second Coming Quotes spreadsheet, and I love this. This was during a fireside. It was posted on YouTube by Jonathan Montgomery, April 23rd, 2024. So just the month after the purchase of the Kirtland Temple. He said, "I think on the other side of the veil, there are, starting with Joseph and Hiram and so many, who have prophesied what we've just witnessed with the transfer of the Kirtland Temple, as well as other prophecies. And I believe that it was orchestrated by the other side. And I think that it was time for that to happen. And I think it's a key that has been turned on the other side of the veil that is going to result in an acceleration of the building of the kingdom and the coming of the Savior. And I totally agree with him. I have another spreadsheet that's a timeline of visions and visitations, and I tend to believe everything that's on there. And it gives you a lot of insight into what is going on the other side of the veil and the interactions that they have with us and with the church and looking over the church. So I think that he's spot on with that. And I do think that this has to do with the second coming. So let's move on to this timeline. You know, um, if you've been watching my channel or the news or other content creators, that recently the new Nauvoo Temple Visitor Center was dedicated. And of course, it was dedicated on the anniversary of the martyrdom of Joseph and Hiram Smith. And one of the big things about this visitor center, the main theme is how Nauvoo is the cornerstone of Zion. You can see that to the left. This stake I have planted to be a cornerstone of Zion. And it's repeated here. Why a cornerstone? And it has, this stuff. You can pause and read this. But I want to move on, or I want to just go to the scripture where this comes from. Doctrine and Covenants 124. Your prayers are acceptable before me, and in answer to them, I say unto you that you are now called immediately to make a solemn proclamation of my gospel, and of this stake which I have planted to be a cornerstone of Zion, which shall be polished with the refinement which is after the similitude of a palace. And then the rest of it is old highlights from another video I did. This proclamation, it's not referring to just generically proclaiming the gospel. This is referring to an actual proclamation of the church. I can't remember which one it was. It may have been the second proclamation. I'm not sure. But we've read it. It was a proclamation to the nations, just like the family proclamation. So far, we only have 6 of these proclamations. The most recent one is the proclamation about the restoration of the priesthood, or the restoration. No, sorry, it was about the restoration. That was introduced in the April 2020 General Conference by President Nelson. But anyway, a cornerstone of Zion. It makes you think what that means. And again, I don't think that this was just a temporary thing that only had to do with the 1840s. I do believe that this is yet future. So, like I said, they made this like the main theme of the visitor center. And then they have this wall, which is really interesting, where it has these different stakes of Zion, these planned cities. You have Kirtland, you have Far West, Independence, Adamonte-Ammon, and Nauvoo. You get this sense that there was this like grand plan. And again, sometimes people like, I don't know if they have strong testimonies, or I don't know if they question things, but I think they think, well, yeah, Joseph Smith tried to do this, or Brigham Young tried to do that. And yes and no. This is the Lord's church. He's the one that ultimately gives these plans or directs the prophets what to do and how to build up the church. And I think that what we saw in the early church was a preview. I think it was a preview of things to come. These are not, in my opinion, based on everything that I've collected, this was not like a temporary plan. This was not simply an attempt. It was the beginning of essentially the future. So, with that in mind, let's take a look at this article. This is the August 2001 Ensign, an article called From New York to Utah, 7 Church Headquarters. And this is where we get into the timeline. We've kind of touched on this before, sort of. But what I'm about to share with you, It was so satisfying to put this together because now I feel like I see it really clearly. And I think it's leading up to the second coming. So the seven church headquarters: Fayette, New York, number one; number two, Kirtland, Ohio; number three, Hiram, Ohio, which is close to Kirtland, Ohio; number four, Far West; number five, Nauvoo; number six, Winter Quarters; and number seven, Salt Lake. Okay. Now, when we think about these significant locations, there was a time after they were abandoned that there was nothing there. There was nothing there. But fast forward to today, 2026, now we've repossessed these locations and built temples, with the exception of Far West. So, Fayette, New York, we have a temple. If you just think about the general area of Palmyra and Fayette, we have the Palmyra, New York temple. So I highlighted this. We're talking about Kirtland right now, and you could include Hiram, Ohio. So we have not only the Kirtland temple back within the possession of the church, but also the Cleveland, Ohio temple. Far West, not yet. Nauvoo, that temple was reconstructed. It was initially destroyed after the Saints went west. The original Nauvoo temple was destroyed, but it's been reconstructed and dedicated, and it is currently an operational temple. Winter Quarters, uh, there was never a temple there, but it was headquarters of the church, and now it has a temple. And then, of course, Salt Lake. But there's more. So this is just the basics of it. Let's go to this new spreadsheet that I've created called Timeline Temples at Historic Sites. Okay. So again, we've got Palmyra / Fayette. So we have the Palmyra, New York temple there. And then we have Independence, which was not church headquarters, but it was meant to be. It would have become church headquarters if the Saints hadn't been driven out of Jackson County. So there was a temple site that was dedicated in 1831. It was the first temple ever announced and still has not been built. Then in 1971, the Independence Visitor Center was built. And this visitor center was built because the city of Independence was wanting to take the church's land because it was just vacant. They were thinking about using eminent domain to take the land and build a high school or something like that. So the church decided to use it, and they consulted the original plan for the city of Zion, which would have been a city that had 2 central blocks with 24 temples, and they determined which temple this would be and the dimensions that were revealed to Joseph Smith, and they built the Independence Visitor Center. So it's currently used as a visitor center. It's meant to be a temple in the future. So we're good there. At any time, if the Lord revealed it, it could just be renovated and turned into a temple, the temple that it's meant to be. And then more recently, in 2012, we got the Kansas City, Missouri temple, which I have a small model of it back here, my tiny 3D temple, Kansas City, Missouri temple. I'll put a link in the description box below, but you can get 15% off with that link. And I haven't found anywhere that really makes miniature temples, unless like it's a popular temple like the Salt Lake Temple. So think about your favorite temple. If you need one for your office, for your home, then 15% off. Get yourself a tiny 3D temple. Okay, and then we have Kirtland, which we've been talking about this whole time. Again, we got the original Kirtland temple and now the Cleveland, Ohio temple. Nothing for Far West yet. Nothing for Adam-on-Diamond. Nauvoo, Winter Quarters, and then Salt Lake. Another way to look at this is if we look at the timeline, because this gives us another glimpse of how things have unfolded. So this is my spreadsheet called Timeline Church. Think about this from the Lord's point of view and think about it from the prophet's point of view. If, say, David O. McKay and or Joseph Fielding Smith were given revelation about how things were going to go, how the church was going to build temples in all these significant locations, prior church headquarters, and locations that probably have a important future in the millennium. The first action, essentially, that was taken by way of building temples in these significant locations was the Independence Visitor Center in 1971. This is the first one. And it makes sense because this is where the New Jerusalem is going to be. It makes sense that now that the church has been established in Utah and has had some time to breathe and build itself up, now that it has the funds to do so, the first one that would be announced, it does not surprise me that it would be the Independence Visitor Center. So that's the first one. Okay. Then 1979, the Kirtland Scourge was removed by President Ezra Taft Benson. Then in 1989, on May 16th, the BYU Jerusalem Center was constructed. We don't know if that's going to become a temple in the future. It does not have to have been built specifically to be a temple. We have many temples like the Vernal, Utah Temple, the Provo City Center Temple, and other temples that were originally some other building, but then renovated to be a temple. And like I said, it seems that there's different types of temples. I'm not so sure that every temple in the millennium is going to be one that has a celestial room and baptistry because of the plans for the city of Zion. Those temples would have been for meetings, and each set of 3 would be for a different priesthood office. There were 3 temples for deacons, 3 temples for teachers, and we don't know how they would have been used, but that's the plan. And so if that's how it is in the New Jerusalem, the Old Jerusalem may have multiple temples. And I find it really interesting how much the Independence Visitor Center, take a good look at the arcade feature that goes around the building, and then this like kind of blocky top up here. Look how much this resembles the BYU Jerusalem Center, which also has an arcade that kind of wraps around and has a blocky top. So I don't know, but I'm thinking yes. I can't say that for sure, but it kind of makes sense as we're going through this timeline. First Independence, and then Jerusalem. And then after that, we get to President Hinckley's presidency, and he dedicates the Palmyra, New York Temple, April 6th of the year 2000. About that temple, do I have this pulled up? No, wait, I have it right here. Just want to read a couple things that was said about that temple in this May 2000 Ensign, an article called 7 Temples Dedicated. It says, the Palmyra dedication came on the date marking the 2000th anniversary of the Savior's birth. So that's highly significant. It should tell you how significant that temple is. President Hinckley said, this is where the first vision occurred, and I think it appropriate that we build a house of the Lord on this ground, said President Hinckley, 15th president of the Church of Jesus Christ, at the groundbreaking ceremony of the Palmyra, New York Temple. Quote, I regard this temple as perhaps the most significant in one respect in the entire church. It was right here in the sacred grove where it all began. Okay, so he does that in the year 2000 on the 2000th anniversary or birthday of the Savior. And then, this is new to me. The next year, I didn't know when it was dedicated. I never really paid attention to that. The very next year, almost exactly a year, also in April, President Hinckley dedicated the Winter Quarters Temple. And then a year after that, he dedicated the reconstructed Nauvoo, Illinois temple. So 3 of these significant temples for 3 years in a row, almost as though that was part of like a larger plan. If we go really quick to my spreadsheet called Timeline 2000 AD, we've already noticed that there were a lot of big things that happened in and around the year 2000, but especially in the year 2000. We already had the dedication of the Palmyra, New York temple on there. There were other things like the conference center being used for the first time, and then in the next general conference being dedicated. President Hinckley had the goal of having 100 temples dedicated by the end of the year, and just a bunch of other things. But it seems like as a part of this like millennial plan, like turn of the millennium plan, it included, I think, these historic sites. I knew that the Winter Quarters Temple was special. I think we all knew that because we knew the history of Winter Quarters. But I think that event may have been more special than what we realized up until this point. It seemed like this was very intentional. In fact, I have an article here. This is KSL, and this is Dr. Alex Baugh, professor of church history and doctrine at BYU. He said, "It's kind of a return to our roots. It's something that is happening in the church. We have a temple in the Palmyra area. We have a temple at Winter Quarters. We have a temple at Nauvoo." So it caught his attention. And yeah, I'm thinking that this was very intentional and part of like a bigger thing going on. More than likely, there was revelation received having to do with the second coming. I mean, maybe not explicitly, but the Lord telling the prophet, I want you to build temples in these sacred sites, places that used to be church headquarters, because they have a future in an important future in the millennium. Okay, so 3 years in a row, Palmyra, Winter Quarters, Nauvoo. I learned from that article that they actually broadcast the dedication of the Winter Quarters Temple as well. So they broadcast the dedication for all 3 of these temples: Palmyra, Winter Quarters, and Nauvoo, for all 3. I guess I didn't catch the one for Winter Quarters. So that's really interesting. And I think that we can expect the same thing for the Salt Lake Temple. Okay, moving on. We get to the year 2012, and President Monson dedicates the Kansas City, Missouri Temple, which is the closest operating temple to Independence. And interestingly, I didn't find this out until a couple months ago. The day before that, the church purchased Haun's Mill, as well as the Far West Burial Ground, as well as the Joseph Smith Senior Home in Kirtland, Ohio, and 6,000 acres of Missouri farmland from Community of Christ. Okay, so that happens the day after the Kansas City, Missouri temple is dedicated. You see this timeline? So you see how it's almost like a checklist. That's what I'm getting at. It's like a checklist. There's more. Then we get to, let's see, October 2018. And that's when President Nelson announced plans to renovate the Salt Lake Temple. So we already had the Salt Lake Temple. Salt Lake City's been the headquarters of the church since the church left Nauvoo and left Winter Quarters. But he announced plans to renovate it. And not just the Salt Lake Temple, but around this time, he also announced the renovation of other Pioneer era temples. So it's like the church is not only building temples and buying temples back, but also renovating uh, the Solid Temple and the other Pioneer era temples. And there's so much that we've said about this renovation and how significant it seems. Well, it seems like it's part of a set. It seems like it's part of a timeline that we're seeing play out. I've never really looked at it this way. Okay, March 2024. Well, I guess I should say President Nelson announced the Cleveland, Ohio temple in 2022. So it was under his presidency that it was announced. Okay, March 5th, 2024, under the presidency of President Nelson, the Kirtland Temple was purchased from Community of Christ. And then that brings us to the most recent item, or the most recent thing on this timeline, the dedication of the Cleveland, Ohio temple. So, what else remains? You know, let's go back. So, before this weekend, this list right here that I have color coded, before this weekend, it looked like this. This is what it looked like. We only had 1, 2, 3, 4 that were highlighted. Now we have this that we can highlight. This has been checked off the list. You could say maybe it was checked off the list by the original Kirtland Temple, but now it's definitely checked off the list with the Cleveland, Ohio Temple. So that kind of only leaves a couple other places. When we're talking about church headquarters, the last one that we're looking at is Far West. That's the last one that we're looking at. I don't know how far away we are from that. Um, what I do know, so look, if we think about what this article said up here, it said 4 stakes. The Cleveland, Ohio temple is going to service 4 stakes. Well, last year, shortly after I moved here, they created 3 new stakes in the Kansas City area. So maybe it's closer than what we realize. The announcement of a Far West temple. I don't think it's as far away as people think. But this is one that needs to be checked off the list. Maybe it's going to be the last one. Like I said, we already have a temple in waiting in Independence. Maybe there'll be more. We've talked about all the different possibilities with Independence, from purchasing the actual temple lot for the primary temple to Community of Christ Auditorium, and how Orson Pratt described the main temple as uh, like resembling what the auditorium is. A very large temple that would seat thousands of people, that would be round, and that would have a dome, essentially. I don't know. But so we got Far West, and then if we go back to this, potentially Adamantiaman as well. Beyond that, there was the city of Seth that was identified by Joseph Smith just a month before the Saints were driven out of Missouri. That city does not seem to have been like other smaller settlements. It seemed to be on the same level as Adamantiaman in Far West. A city of holiness, an actual stake of Zion that probably would have had a temple. So you could possibly throw in the city of Seth. I've also thought about Harmony, Pennsylvania, which is now, I think it's called like Oakland Township or something like that. Um, Maybe that should be on this list too. I don't know. But just look at all this progress that has been made. Okay, wind back the clock to 1999. And let's go back to 1999. This is what this spreadsheet would have looked like in 1999. Let's just change the colors here. So yeah, Kirtland. It's got to go. Yeah, Nauvoo. Winter quarters. And then the Salt Lake Temple, you could just leave that there. Oh no, sorry. We have the Independence Visitor Center. I shouldn't have changed that. So in the year 1999, this is what this spreadsheet would have looked like. Independence Visitor Center, Salt Lake Temple, BYU Jerusalem Center. No winter quarters, no Nauvoo Temple, Adamantium Far West, Kirtland, Palmyra / Fayette. So a timeline. And if remarkable progress has been made on this timeline, and it does to me feel like it's leading up to the second coming. I truly believe that. Let's get our colors back here. The last one there, Palmyra. Okay, so let's see. I think that's pretty much all that I had. Yeah, let me read this about the Winter Quarters Temple. So important is the legacy of Winter Quarters to the church that the proceedings of the first session were transmitted by satellite to church meeting houses in North America, where worthy church members were issued special recommends by priestly leaders to attend. The only other time that has happened was the dedication of the Palmyra, New York Temple on April 6th of the year 2000. And then a year after this, it would happen again for the Nauvoo Temple. And that's most likely going to happen for the Salt Lake Temple. In regards to the dedication of the Nauvoo Temple, it says here, President Gordon B. Hinckley presided Thursday at what many believe will be the largest dedication ceremony ever held for one of the faith's temples. Well, that is until, most likely, the rededication of the Salt Lake Temple. And then for all we know, possibly the Far West Temple, and most likely for the Independence Temple. We'll just have to see how that shakes out. And that's it. That's it. So, you guys, if this is a timeline, and it seems like it is, then we are like at the end of that timeline. There may be just like one or two more items to check off the list, and then we're done. These areas are being built up again. There are people moving here. A lot of people are moving east because it is really expensive to live out west. And we're building up these waste places. It's exciting. All right, well, that's going to be it for this one. I'll talk to you guys later.